Trump loves to make false claims without any real consideration of how harmful those false claims are. One of the more hurtful ones he makes is the voter fraud claims. Now, to be clear, when I say hurtful, I am not talking about my personal feelings, but rather harmful to the American experiment, America, and American values. The very things he falsely claims to love. Today we will tackle the false claim about voter fraud, why it's harmful, and why it's fake news. If you don't already know, congressional districts are gerrymandered. I don't really want this to be a video about gerrymandering too much, but to get people up to speed, gerrymandering is a way of drawing the district boundaries in order to get the desired outcome that the person doing the gerrymandering wants. Here's my attempt at showing basic gerrymandering. Here are 9 blocks, 3 vote blue and 6 vote red. Among those 9 blocks, there are 3 districts. So a fair way of drawing the borders would be like this: 2 red districts, 1 blue. 2/3 of districts are red and 2/3 of voters are red. The district's victories are equal to voters' popular vote. Now let's gerrymander this very simple setup. And just like that, 1/3 of the population no longer has their vote matter. 3 districts, all red, only using 2/3 of the vote. So this was a pretty basic example, but this principle is used in real world districting, which leads to crazy districts like this one, or like this. Resulting in skewed outcomes. In 2012, the GOP got 47% of the congressional vote, but got 54% of the seats. 2014, 51% of the vote, 57% of the seats. 2016, 51% of the vote, but 55% of the seats. Now here's the thing, to achieve these results, you have to be pretty in tune and informed about the voting public. You need to be able to predict who's going to vote for who and where they live. Otherwise, it would not be possible to gerrymander anything. This means that the GOP is very much aware of what's going on with the voters. They know what to expect out of an election. And don't think for a second that the GOP would allow Democrats to just blatantly break the voting laws without as much of a public outcry. Now, I am not saying that there are never any surprises in an election. Surprises definitely happen, upsets happen, but they are always pretty much within the realm of what pollsters would call the margin of error. Which means this is the result we expect, however, this is how wrong potentially the results could be. But wait, you say, weren't the polls crazy wrong in 2016 presidential election? Well, kinda, but not really. When you actually look at it, look at the last RCP average of polls, RCP being Real Clear Politics. The time of the election, RCP, which boils down a number of respected polls, was giving Clinton a 3.2 point advantage. Now look at the popular vote. She won by, oh my god, 2.1 points. But how could this be? That's not Trump's narrative. He claims the polls had it wrong. Felt like they had it wrong because they were favoring Clinton and she lost because of the Electoral College. But what about polls that account for the Electoral College? Well, the closest we get to that are map predictions, and RCP's map predictions was pretty accurate minus the mistake of Wisconsin. So when things don't go as expected, it raises a lot of eyebrows. You need to understand that there isn't only an entire industry that purely focuses on predicting the outcome of elections. The 2 major parties have huge apparatuses in place to make sure that the results are genuine. Each party will have scrutineers at the polls. These are people that are sent by the political parties to supervise the polls and make sure those that are working the polls are doing their jobs correctly and that there's no funny business going on. There's a lot of rules that govern the scrutineers, like for example, they are not allowed to wear any political messaging. That's because they are there to observe and report and not intimidate. They really do look over the workers' shoulders literally, making sure they are checking names correctly, cross-referencing voter rolls, and just running the poll in a way that is not biased against their parties. They become very important in high voter turnout to make sure that the newly registered voters are being registered correctly. Okay, so let's say the scrutineers didn't notice any funny business, but the results are not adding up. This is an irregularity, and it sets off a red flag immediately that will require investigation. Challengers from the political parties again will be represented and an investigation will start as to why there is an irregularity. Often these investigations will in fact turn out voter fraud. But it's never what Republican lunatics claim they are. It's often ex-cons voting or a few people voting at the wrong poll. Trump won the election and he won in an upset to Clinton. Therefore, logically speaking, it should be the Democrats suspicious of funny business. After all, indicators were showing Clinton to be the winner. But that did not stop Trump from sounding off and making false claims. He and his supporters like to claim that there were millions, I repeat, millions. For those of you who don't know, a metropolitan city typically has millions of people. But somehow, a mass of people large enough to be one of the country's largest city got away with voting illegally. They somehow got through the GOP scrutineers and did not set off any irregularity alarms. I heard Trump supporters claim that they saw busloads of illegal aliens get bussed out to the polls. I mean, here's the thing. If you're racist and ignorant, and you think America is a white, English-speaking nation, then seeing busloads of non-white, non-English speaking voters get bussed to the polls would sure alarm you. But unfortunately for you, much of America is not white, and many Americans don't speak English. Whether you like it or not, American land existed before white Europeans came here. Much of it became Spanish, where people spoke Spanish. Not to mention the people of America are mainly made up of immigrants. According to the US Census, 35 million Americans do not speak English at home. Yes, America. There are massive amounts of communities in the US that are poor and not English speakers. Trump supporters would have you believe those communities are all illegal immigrants, but that's not true. Within those communities, there are many American citizens, if not most, that share in the community's language, poverty, and culture. Sadly, those communities tend to be poor, so they do not have easy access to transportation, but they still have the right to vote. So transportation can be organized to get the voters in those communities to the polls on election day, resulting in a bus full of brown-skinned people speaking Spanish showing up to vote and red hat-wearing white guys' heads exploding. And since those red hat-wearing don't understand that non-white does not mean non-citizen,
in America, we speak English.
So?
We don't have to listen.
Who say that? Who say that? Who say that?
out comes the crazy claims. They are busing illegal immigrants to the polls. It's all just very racist and ignorant. Anyways, Trump wins. So what's the logical thing to do now that you're in power and believe in this ignorant and crazy voter fraud conspiracy? Well, open an investigation, of course, and I support this. Let's put these Republican minds at ease with an investigation. The Voter Commission, or more officially known as the Presidential Advisory Commission to Election Integrity, the commission was doomed right from the start. Because the Commission's mission was not to investigate, but rather create a smokescreen in order to allow the GOP to pass voter laws that would improve their chances in elections. The Commission's day-to-day operations was headed by Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach. Chris was seen at Trump National Golf Course in Bedminster, New Jersey, to meet with then President-elect Trump, holding folders labeled Department of Homeland Security Kobach's Strategic Plan for the First 365 Days. The ACLU was in an active lawsuit with Chris, who was performing voter suppression in the state of Kansas at the time. The ACLU sued to try to obtain the contents of that file, and Chris's only defense as to why that he shouldn't have to release those documents was that ACLU was only trying to embarrass him. Why would you be embarrassed, Chris? Would those docs make you sound like a crazy person? A crazy person that knows there is no voter fraud yet in public claim that there is? Because claiming one thing while knowing another is what mentally ill people do, or just a liar. And that's exactly what this Chris Kobach guy does. A judge ended up finding him for grossly misleading representation and said the court agrees that the defendant's deceptive conduct and lack of candor warrant the imposition of sanctions. And this was pertaining to the contents of that file that supposedly shows illegal immigrants voting. Yeah, this guy seems like a fine gentleman. Good thing Trump made him the day-to-day boss of the Voter Fraud Commission. This guy definitely is going to uncover the truth, right? The commission was a purely partisan endeavor, only made up by Republicans. There was officially 2 Democrats on it, but they said they were never briefed on anything and completely kept out of the loop. In fact, during the formation of the commission, it was urged that the commission would be free of Democrats, moderate Republicans, and/or academics. Yep, because, you know, only the right-wing extremists know the truth. I also love how they didn't want academics on the commission. Yeah, let's not let the people who specialize in truth finding and unbiased judgment get in the way of what we're doing, which we claim to be truth finding missions. The commission right away got to work on fact finding, but by asking every state to provide names, addresses, and party affiliations of all registered voters. Kopaks are birth dates, felony conviction records, voter histories for the past decade, and the last 4 digits of all voters' social security numbers. The commission provided a website link to where the information could be sent to. However, the website link was found to be non-secured. There were also laws that prevented states from legally being allowed to release such vast and detailed information. And understandably, we're talking about tens of millions of people, very personal information being released here via an unsecured site to radicals, exposing them to tremendous risk like identity theft. Not only that, but remember, this is a partisan investigation. Why should only one side get granted such access? In the end, not a single state complied, as the request was so far from being reasonable. The closest they came to finding proof of widespread voter fraud was in New Hampshire, seeing that over 5,000 people had voted without a state ID. But upon further investigation, most of those were out-of-state students currently attending school in New Hampshire. It should be noted that in New Hampshire, one does not have to be a resident to vote there, but only domiciled. The commission was recipient to numerous lawsuits, and having lost a major one and being ordered by the courts to share all of their findings with the Democrats, they decided to disband the commission 2 weeks later. Many believe the reason for the disbanding was because the commission's plan to create a report to support GOP voter suppression, but would not be able to do so if they had to share the findings that led to the report with the Democrats, therefore rendering the whole exercise useless. I'd like to talk about how harmful and irresponsible all these tactics are. America's democracy's fundamental bedrock is the peaceful transition of power. No matter how bitter the election was, the loser concedes and acknowledges the outcome.
I had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night, about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. And I had a chance to invite him to come to the White House tomorrow to talk about making sure that there is a successful transition between our presidencies.
Failure to do so would make American democracy fragment and fall apart fundamentally. You lose an election, you accept it and move on. You don't cry foul without very good reason, because it will literally stop the transition of power that the American people want. It casts doubt on the election and makes it harder to keep a rather large nation united. Ultimately would lead to the demise of the American experiment, something that the founding fathers were all very well acknowledged to.